The sound of the door crashing open echoed through the small apartment, the harsh thud of metal on wood causing my heart to lurch in my chest. I was barely through the door when I saw James, my best friend, standing there, face ashen, his eyes wide with fear. He hadn't moved, hadn't even spoken yet, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Something was horribly wrong, something much bigger than the usual messes he'd gotten himself into. Before I could ask, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy boots on the floor, thumping down the hallway. My instincts kicked in. I started to back away, but James reached out, grabbing my arm with a grip so tight it almost hurt. "You can't leave, man. They're here. You don't know what they're capable of," he whispered, voice trembling with a fear I hadn't seen in him before. His breath smelled of whiskey and something else, desperation. I stared at him, confusion clouding my mind. "Who? What the hell is going on, James? You look like you've seen a ghost. Who's coming for us?" The words barely left my mouth before the door behind me opened wider, and two figures stepped into the room, both wearing dark clothes and carrying the unmistakable air of men who didn't need to explain themselves. "Well, well, well," the taller one said, his voice smooth like velvet, but there was no mistaking the cold malice underneath. "Looks like James couldn't get away, huh? And looks like he brought a friend." He turned his eyes to me, and in that moment I knew with an almost sick certainty, that this was no random encounter. This was planned, and whatever the hell James had gotten himself involved in, I was now in deep. "What do you want with me?" I demanded, adrenaline surging through my veins. My hands were shaking, but I was doing everything I could to keep my voice steady, to act like I wasn't terrified out of my mind. The second guy, shorter but with a frame that screamed danger, took a step forward. His eyes locked on mine, cold and unblinking. "We don't want anything with you, buddy. But we do want what's owed to us, and we don't care who's in the way," the short guy said, his voice low, like a growl just beneath the surface. James' grip tightened on my arm, and I could feel his pulse racing through his fingers. No, you don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could make it back. I thought I could win enough to pay you off, but it got out of hand. I never meant to drag him into this." "Drag him into this?" The tall guy sneered, taking a step forward. "You think we care about your little friend here? You think this is some kind of joke?" He leaned in, his breath hot against my face, and for a second, I thought I might suffocate from the sheer menace of it. "You owe us, James, and we don't take kindly to people who can't pay what they owe." I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. My heart was thumping, pounding so loudly I thought it might drown out everything else. "What did you do, James?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "What did you get us into?" James closed his eyes, as if he couldn't bear to see me looking at him, but he didn't try to hide the truth anymore. "I gambled, okay," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I got in over my head. I took money from the casino. From you. I thought I could turn it around, but I lost it all. I thought I could win it back, but I couldn't. And now, they want everything back plus more. And if I can't pay, they take it from me. And from you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My own money? The money I'd trusted him with? It wasn't just his life on the line anymore. This had become my mess too, and in a single moment, everything I thought I knew about him, everything I thought I knew about myself, had been turned upside down. "Is that how it is?" I asked, voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You think this is just some game? You think you can drag me into this mess because of your stupid gambling problem?" But before he could answer, the tall guy spoke again. "Enough talk," he said, his hand coming to rest on the gun at his belt. "You think you can just pay us back with some apology? No, James. You're going to make it right. You're going to fix your mess, or we'll fix it for you." I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no reasoning with these people. No negotiation. No way out. James turned to me, eyes desperate now, the weight of his actions bearing down on him. "You have to go. Please just go. Get out of here while you can." I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, every instinct telling me to run, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear, or maybe it was loyalty, or maybe it was the simple fact that I couldn't just leave my best friend here to face whatever nightmare he had dragged me into. But before I could decide what to do, The shorter man took a step forward, his fingers twitching toward the gun again. "Run, and we'll make sure you never get far enough to even breathe," he said, his tone lethal. James was right. There was no running from this. And suddenly, my whole world seemed to crash down around me. "Well, looks like we've got ourselves a little problem," the tall man said, his eyes narrowing. "But don't worry, we'll sort this out." I turned to James, my mind racing. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. But James didn't answer. Instead, he turned away from me, his back to the door, as if he was already preparing for the worst. "Just do what they say," he said quietly. "There's nothing else we can do." And as the door slammed shut behind us, the heavy silence hanging in the air like a death sentence, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. I don't remember much of what happened in the next few minutes. The adrenaline in my veins blurred everything around me. The two men, still standing in front of us, didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. The atmosphere in the room had already shifted from threatening to suffocating. The longer we stood there, the more I realized I was trapped in a nightmare I had no idea how to escape. My best friend, the guy I thought I knew, had dragged me into a situation where my only option seemed to be to either pay or die. And even if I didn't want to be a part of it anymore, it felt like there was no way out. The tall man glanced at his partner, the one with the gun at his belt, then back at James, who hadn't moved an inch. There was something about the way the taller man looked at James that sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't angry, not in the way someone would be if they were about to extract revenge. No, he was calculating, as if figuring out how to make James suffer without ever having to touch him. And I had a horrible feeling it wasn't just the money they were after. They were going to make us both pay for James' mistake, and I wasn't sure how far they'd go to make their point. "Here's the deal," the tall man said, his voice eerily calm. "You've got two choices. One, you can get the money and you'll walk away. Easy enough, right? Or two, we take our payment from you. Both of you." I stared at him, trying to comprehend what he was suggesting. "You want money? From me? I don't have 30 grand just lying around." I shot back, my mind racing for any way out of this. The shorter man scoffed. "You think we care about what you have or don't have? This isn't a discussion. This is us telling you how it's going to be." His hand rested on the handle of his gun, as if reminding me of the power he had in this moment. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with tension. I could feel the cold sweat on my back, my pulse quickening as I tried to think of anything that might get me out of this. James seemed to shrink further into himself, his eyes darting between the two men and the door. I didn't mean for this to happen," he muttered, almost too quietly to hear. "I thought I could get back in the game, I thought I could make up for it, but I got cocky. And now it's too late." "You're right about that," the tall man replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's too late. But there's still a way out for you, James. If you can't pay up, we'll just have to take what's ours some other way." He glanced over at his partner, who gave him a small nod in agreement. I watched in confusion, trying to figure out what they meant. They didn't look like they were going to shoot us, but the tension in the room was unbearable, and I didn't trust them not to pull the trigger if we made the wrong move. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse. The tall man didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in, just close enough for me to feel the heat of his breath. "What we mean is this, pal," he said slowly, each word measured. "If James can't pay, then we take something else. Your life is life, doesn't matter to us. If we have to leave with nothing, we'll make sure you never forget the lesson." I felt my stomach twist. The fear in my chest was now a full-blown panic. I thought maybe we could talk our way out of it, but the longer I listened, the more it seemed like there was no way to avoid the violence they were promising. "What lesson?" I asked, my voice shaking now. The shorter man smirked, stepping closer. "The lesson, kid, is simple. Don't ever think you can play with fire and not get burned. Don't get mixed up in things you don't understand." The truth of the situation settled in, like a cold stone in my gut. I was in way over my head. The promise of violence was real. These guys weren't bluffing, and James had somehow gotten me caught up in this mess without warning me. The tall man straightened up, his eyes now locking onto mine with a dangerous focus. "Here's the thing, though," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "We're not unreasonable. We're not monsters, despite what you might think. We don't have to take what's yours. If you help us out, you could walk away from this. But if you don't, you'll regret it. I could hear James beside me, practically shaking with fear, as he tried to figure out how to fix this. But he wasn't offering any solutions, and it was clear to me now that he was as lost as I was. And even if I didn't want to be involved anymore, I couldn't escape the fact that these men had already made me a target. My options were limited, and my trust in James was hanging by a thread. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to make a deal with these men, but what choice did I have? I didn't even know how to get myself out of this mess. The tall man's lips curled into a smirk. "We're simple guys, really," he said, tapping his fingers on the table in front of him. "We just need you to make the right choice. Help us out, and we'll let you both walk away. We've got some people we need to talk to, some things we need to finish. You can do that, right?" I wasn't sure if I could trust anything he said, but it felt like my only option. James was still frozen, his face pale, his hands trembling. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to help them. Just let me fix it, I swear." His voice cracked, and for a second I thought he might break down. But then he straightened up, clenching his fists. "I'll make it right, I swear. Just leave him out of this." The taller man shrugged, not bothering to hide his amusement. "It's not really up to you anymore, is it?" he said, his tone condescending. "We'll be in touch. And when we are, you'll have exactly one chance to fix this. Don't make us regret not taking your life tonight, James." And with that, they turned to leave, their heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. I stood there, staring at James, who looked completely broken. What had happened to him? What had happened to the guy I'd known my whole life? "I'm sorry, man," he whispered, almost too softly to hear. I didn't want any of this. But I couldn't answer him. I couldn't find the words. My mind was racing with the implications of what had just happened, the fear and the uncertainty that had taken root inside me. What the hell had I gotten myself into? The next few days blurred together. I couldn't focus on anything. I spent my time running through every possible scenario in my head, trying to figure out how I could get myself out of this mess. The threats, the casino, the debt. Every single detail felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. James was no help. He had become a shell of the person I used to know. I'd never seen him like this before, so desperate, so afraid. Every time I tried to talk to him, he'd shut down or worse, give me the same apology over and over like it was supposed to make everything better. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The men who had come to collect were always just a few steps behind us. I started noticing their cars outside our building. I'd catch glimpses of them watching from the street, or I'd hear the telltale sound of footsteps in the hallway at night. They were waiting. I didn't know what they would do, but I knew it wouldn't be pretty. One afternoon, after what felt like days of silence, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but something about it made me pick it up without hesitation. "Hello," I said, my voice tight with anxiety. "It's me," a familiar voice replied, low and clipped. It was James. He didn't sound like himself. He sounded even more on edge than usual. I need you to meet me. There's someone who can help." "Help with what?" I asked, already suspicious. He hadn't even given me the details of what was going on yet. "Just trust me. I'm at the usual spot. Don't bring anyone else." I wanted to scream at him, ask him what he was talking about, but instead, I hung up, grabbed my jacket, and made my way out of the apartment. When I arrived at the spot, a dingy, hole-in-the-wall bar where James and I had spent countless hours in the past, the place was nearly empty. It was midday, so there were only a few regulars sitting at the bar, nursing their beers, none of them paying attention to me. James was sitting at a table in the corner, his face hidden in the shadows. I didn't approach him right away. Instead, I stood by the door for a moment, watching him closely. I didn't know what he was planning, but I didn't trust him anymore. Something was off. He didn't even notice me until I walked over to his table, the sound of my footsteps breaking the silence. "What's going on, James?" I asked, taking a seat across from him. "You said someone could help. Who is it?" James looked up at me, his eyes darting around the room, as though he expected someone to jump out of the walls. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice trembling. "I've been talking to someone. They're willing to help us, but you have to trust me." "Who?" I pressed, my impatience growing. "Who the hell is this person? And what do they want?" James took a deep breath, and for the first time in days, he seemed to focus on me, really look at me. "His name's Marco," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's connected. He knows the people who work for the casino. He's the one who's been helping me, keeping them off my back. But he's been asking for a favor, something big. I don't know if you'll be willing to do it, but it's the only way out of this." The words hung in the air between us like a noose. "What kind of favor?" I asked, my stomach sinking. I didn't like where this was going. James hesitated, looking away for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "Marco wants us to work for him. He's in deep with the casino, too. He's got a lot of leverage over them, but he needs us to help him with a job, something that'll get us both out of this mess." I leaned back in my chair, processing what James had just said. "What kind of job?" James glanced around the room again, his voice dropping even lower. "Marco wants us to steal something from the casino. It's something valuable, something the higher-ups don't want anyone to know about. If we do this, he'll make sure the debt's forgiven. No more threats. No more people showing up at our door." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. The last thing I wanted was to get deeper into this world of criminals, of debts, and betrayal. But at the same time, what choice did I have? The men who had come to collect weren't going to back off. They'd already made it clear that I was in as much danger as James was. And if this Marco guy was telling the truth, maybe this was our only shot at survival. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a deal with the devil. I wasn't naive enough to think that doing Marco's dirty work would get us off scot-free. I knew there would be consequences, that we would pay for it in ways we couldn't even imagine. "I don't know, James," I said slowly, my hands clenched in a fist on the table. "You're asking me to go along with some robbery. You want me to help you steal from the casino to save our lives? Do you even know what they'll do if we screw this up?" James looked desperate now, the anxiety and fear etched across his face. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've been talking to Marco for weeks. He's got everything set up. He's got the plan. We just have to follow through, and we're out. They'll let us go." I ran my hands through my hair, trying to think clearly. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. If I turned my back on James now, I might never get the chance to help him again. And if I went along with his plan, I might be digging my own grave. "You have to decide, man," James said, his voice low and pleading. "Please, I'm begging you." I exhaled sharply, trying to push the fear and uncertainty out of my mind. "What's the plan?" I asked, resigning myself to the reality of it all. James finally looked me in the eye. "Tomorrow, Marco will meet us. He'll tell us what to do. We'll go in, get what he needs, and get out. No one will know it was us." I felt sick to my stomach. The weight of the decision hit me harder than I expected, but I had no choice. If I didn't do this, I wasn't just sealing James' fate. I was sealing my own. "All right," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." James nodded, his expression one of relief, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that we were walking straight into a trap. There was something more to this than James was letting on, and I couldn't figure out if we were running towards safety or into the arms of something even worse than we were already in. The next day felt like a weight I couldn't shake off. I'd barely slept, turning over the decision in my mind over and over, trying to convince myself that helping James was the right thing to do. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like we were just getting deeper into a hole we wouldn't be able to climb out of. There was no way of knowing if Marco was telling the truth, or if he was just another player in this dangerous game that would leave us both dead. Still, I had made my choice. There was no backing out now. I met James in the same bar that night. The place was practically empty, save for the usual few patrons nursing their drinks. He was already sitting at the table, a drink in front of him, his eyes darting around as if he were expecting someone to walk through the door at any moment. When he saw me, his face shifted from anxious to relieved. It was the first time I'd seen him look something close to common days. But I wasn't fooled. He was just as nervous as I was. "Marco's coming," James said as soon as I sat down. "He'll be here soon. We just have to wait a little longer." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stared at James, trying to gauge if there was more to his words than he was letting on. He had been telling me about Marco, how he had been the one who could make everything go away, how we'd be free once we did this job. But even as he spoke, there was something in his eyes that didn't sit right with me. There was a flicker of fear, of uncertainty. It was like he wasn't telling me everything, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something important. "James, are you sure about this?" I finally asked, my voice low. "I'm going in blind, man. I don't even know what we're stealing, or who these people really are. What if this all goes wrong?" He hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously on the glass. "I know it's risky," he admitted, looking down at the table. "But I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to fix it otherwise. Marco said if we just do this one thing, we're clear. The casino won't come after us anymore. We'll be free." But even as he spoke the words, I could see the doubt creeping into his expression. James wasn't the type to back down, but there was something about this situation that had him on edge. Something wasn't adding up, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that we were being played. Before I could press him further, the door opened. A man walked in, tall and sharp-looking, dressed in a tailored suit that made him stand out even in a place like this. He scanned the room for a moment, his eyes landing on us almost immediately. James stood up as soon as he saw him, and I followed his lead. The man walked over, and his gaze flicked to me briefly before settling on James. "You're late," Marco said in a deep voice, his words calm, but carrying a sense of authority. "I know," James said quickly, his voice apologetic. There was a lot to figure out." Marco didn't respond right away. He just nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We don't have much time. You're either in or you're out. No second chances." I didn't like the way he said that. The finality in his tone made it clear that there was no room for hesitation, no chance to back out once we agreed to this. But I'd already made my decision. I had no choice now. I sat down, and James did the same. Marco didn't waste any time. He pulled out a thick envelope from his coat pocket and slid it across the table toward us. "This is everything you need to know," he said, his voice still smooth, but with an edge of impatience. "The job's simple. Get in, get the item, and get out. We've arranged for a way to get past the security. You'll have 5 minutes at most before the system resets. Once you're in, you take it, and you leave. No questions. No hesitation." I looked down at the envelope, unsure of what I was about to get into. My hand reached for it, but I hesitated, giving Marco one last look. "What exactly are we stealing?" I asked, my voice steady despite the growing knot in my stomach. Marco's eyes glinted with something I couldn't quite place. "Does it matter?" he asked, his voice turning cold. "You don't need to know the details. You just need to follow through. If you do this right, I'll make sure the casino's debt is forgiven. You'll never have to worry about them again." I wasn't satisfied with that answer, but I didn't have time to push. Marco's presence was already looming over us, and I knew that questioning him further might cost us whatever leverage we had left. James grabbed the envelope, pulling out a sheet of paper. It was a layout of the casino, showing the security checkpoints, the vault, and the location of the item we were supposed to steal. But there was something off about it. The layout wasn't just a map of the casino. It was a map of the entire building, the back rooms, the hidden floors. It didn't take long for me to realize that the item we were supposed to steal wasn't just any object. It was something more significant, something important. "What is this?" I asked, a sense of dread creeping into my chest. "This isn't just a random job. You want us to steal something valuable, don't you?" Marco didn't answer. Instead, he simply stood up, sliding the map closer to us. "You'll figure it out once you get there. Don't waste time asking questions. Just do the job." I looked at James, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was guilt, and maybe it was the way he looked at me, or maybe it was the way Marco was acting, but I suddenly realized something. James wasn't just involved in this mess. He was in deeper than I had ever imagined. And now I was too. "We're in," James said, his voice almost hollow. "We'll do it." Marco nodded, his eyes flicking between us one last time. "Good. Get it done, and I'll see you both soon. If you don't, you'll regret it." The weight of those words sank in as soon as the door clicked shut behind him. We were about to walk into a storm, and there was no turning back now. The night before the job, I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop racing, running through every possible scenario of how things might go wrong. I'd been in tight situations before, but nothing like this. Nothing where my life, and possibly James's, hung in the balance. The casino was a fortress. The people we were up against were dangerous. Marco had made it clear that failure was not an option, and something in the way he said it had left me with a chill. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being set up, but I had no choice. I had made the decision to see this through, and now I had to follow through. James was just as nervous, though he tried to hide it. He kept pacing back and forth in the small apartment, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Every time he spoke, his voice cracked, betraying the fear that he couldn't contain. "This is it, man. We don't get another shot at this. If we screw this up, it's over. We won't walk away from this." I nodded, though inside I was just as scared. My thoughts kept going back to what Marco had said about the job being simple. In and out. 5 minutes. But I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Nothing ever was when you were in too deep. And the longer I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't even know what we were really after. We had the map. We knew the security layout. But Marco had kept the details of the actual item under wraps. What were we risking everything for? The plan was simple, but that was what worried me. We were supposed to hit the vault. No alarms. No mistakes. The casino security systems were supposed to be bypassed, and the guards were supposed to be neutralized. But all of this depended on the assumption that Marco wasn't lying to us, that the plan would work as he promised. As we left for the casino, the weight of what we were about to do pressed on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The night was dark, the city streets empty as we made our way to the location Marco had given us. The entire drive, I could feel the tension building, thickening the air around us. James barely spoke. I couldn't blame him. I wasn't sure what to say either. There were no reassurances I could offer that would make either of us feel better. We arrived at the back of the casino, an industrial-looking area that didn't fit with the lavishness of the building's front. We parked in an alleyway, the shadows swallowing us whole. The plan was for Marco's people to disable the security cameras, but we would have to get in, get to the vault, and get out without drawing attention. It all sounded too simple. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized there was no way Marco was going to help us for free. He was in this for his own gain. And if we did the job, we'd be in debt to him forever. We stick to the plan. I muttered to James, my voice rough. We get in, get out. No mistakes. He nodded, though I could tell he was struggling to keep it together. Right? No mistakes. We just do what Marco told us. It's all set up. We get in, take whatever it is, and we're done. But as we approached the back door, a sick feeling settled in my stomach. Something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a nagging doubt in the back of my mind. I kept telling myself it was just nerves, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The door creaked open, and we slipped inside. The dimly lit hallways of the casino were eerily quiet. The whole place seemed like a ghost town. The sounds of the casino floor, the chatter, the clinking of chips, were all muffled as if we were in a different world. The only sound that filled the air was our footsteps. James led the way, his hand steady on the map Marco had given us, his breath shallow. Every corner we turned felt like another step deeper into the unknown. As we made our way toward the vault, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. It felt like someone was watching us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself looking over my shoulder at every turn. The whole place felt off. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that something wasn't right. We reached the vault, and for a moment, the reality of what we were about to do hit me like a punch to the gut. There were no guards, no alarms. It was as if the entire place had been designed for us to walk in and out without a problem. But that wasn't right. Marco's people had to be involved somehow. He wouldn't have set everything up so perfectly without an agenda of his own. James was already working on the vault door, his hands moving quickly as he punched in the codes Marco had given him. But something wasn't right. The door didn't open. The screen blinked, but it didn't respond. His hands trembled as he tried again, but the same thing happened. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead as he continued to work, trying desperately to get the door open. "James, what the hell is going on?" I asked, my voice tight with panic. "I don't know," he hissed, his frustration evident. "It's supposed to work. It should be fine." That's when I heard it. the sound of footsteps. Heavy boots. Moving fast. "Get down!" I shouted, pushing James to the ground as I dove behind a stack of crates near the vault. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to steady my breath. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, and then I heard voices. "This wasn't part of the plan," a voice muttered. "They're here. They've already started." I recognized the voice. It was Marco. He wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't part of the deal. James froze beside me, his face pale. "They set us up," he whispered, his voice trembling. I felt the ground slip out from under me as the realization hit. Marco had never intended to help us. He had used us to get the item, whatever it was, for himself. And now, we were expendable. Before I could react, the lights suddenly flickered, and the door to the vault swung open. We weren't the ones who had opened it. It was already unlocked, waiting for us. But I knew then that this wasn't a simple job. It had never been about the money. It had never been about getting us out. It had always been about Marco using us to get what he needed, and now we were caught in his web with no way out. "We have to go," I said, pulling James to his feet. "Now!" We ran, not looking back, not daring to even consider the consequences of what we had just stumbled into. The deal was off. We were on our own now, and if we didn't get out, we would never leave this place alive.